There we go. Science. Welcome back to, whatever I set the title for, Wednesday Mic Check with Watts Wednesdays. Or something. With me, your intrepid narrator Fragath, we're going to be reading more of Beyond the Rift, a short story collection by the inestimable Peter Watts. I have cranked up the mic's gain yet again by a couple decibels. I should move where that fan is pointing. Give me a sec. That's better. So that is not facing use all, and hopefully will not pick up too much of that. Oh, I forgot to turn that down. Let me do that. That should be better. Okay, so previously on, we read a bunch of short stories, culminating in Nimbus, which is a story about killer clouds, or killer weather systems, really, that are actively antagonistic towards humanity, which is a good time. I just think the idea is neat. So this week we've got a couple that I've got planned to read through. We've got Mayfly, which is co-authored with Daryl Murphy. We've got Ambassador. We've got the very short Hillcrest v. Velikovsky, and the even shorter Repeating the Past, which is sort of like a letter, I guess. How long is the segment after that? Yeah, one we'll save for this Friday, I guess. Okay, so yeah, we're still putting this through its paces. If this is too noisy, I'm trying to listen to some of these after the fact. Much as it makes me cringe at everything going horribly wrong. But you have to do it. One must do it in order to improve, and someday I'm going to get better. Also, so I know how these voices actually sound to other people and not just in my head, because I've got not only my brain, everything sounds different in your own skull box, resonates through your sinuses, all sorts of other things, but also you've got how you think it sounds running through your head. It's an experience. Part of why I don't like hearing my voice recorded is because I'm like, oh, that's not me. That's some other weird guy. That's Barney the dinosaur or something. Anyway, without further ado, let's do Mayfly. This one's pretty good. This one stuck with me. Alright. Give me one sec here to get a little more water in me, and we will get rockin' and a-rollin'. Mayfly with Daryl Murphy by Peter Watts. Oh, Mayfly by Peter Watts with Daryl Murphy. Better.
I hate you.
A 4-year-old girl. A room as barren as a fishbowl.
I hate you.
Little fists clenching. One of the cameras set to motion cap zoomed on them automatically. 2 others watched the adults, mother, father, on opposite sides of the room. The machines watched the players. Half a world away, Stavros watched the machines.
I hate you. I hate you. I hate you.
The girl was screaming now, her face contorted in anger and anguish. There were tears at the edge of her eyes, but they stayed there, never falling. Her parents shifted like nervous animals, scared of the anger, used to the outbursts, but far from comfortable with them. At least this time she was using words. Usually she just howled. She leaned against the blanked window, fists pounding. The window took her assault like hard white rubber, denting slightly, then rebounding. One of the few things the room Oh, geez. One of the few things in the room that bounced back when she struck out. One less thing to break.
Jeannie, hush.
Her mother reached out a hand. Her father, as usual, stood back, a mixture of anger and resentment and confusion on his face. Stavros frowned. A veritable pillar of paralysis, that man. And then, they don't deserve her. The screaming child didn't turn, her back a defiant slap. Whoa, I can't flip pages good. Her Let's try that again. The screaming child didn't turn, her back a defiant slap at Kim and Andrew Gorovech. Could be either one, I guess. Stavros had a better view. Jeannie's face was just a few centimeters away from the southeast pickup. For all the pain it showed, for all the pain Jeannie had felt in the 4 short years of her physical life, those few tiny drops that never fell were the closest she ever came to crying.
Make it clear,
she demanded, segueing abruptly from anger to petulance. Kim Gorovech shook her head.
Honey, we'd love to show you outside. Remember before how much you liked it? But you have to promise not to scream at it all the time. You didn't used to, honey. You... Now!
Back to rage, the pure, white-hot anger of a small child. The pads on the wall panel were greasy from Jeannie's repeated, sticky-fingered attempts to use them herself. Andrew flashed a begging look at his wife. Please, let's just give her what she wants. His wife was stronger.
Jeannie, we know it's difficult.
Jeannie turned to face the enemy. The north pickup got it all, the right hand rising to the mouth, the index finger going in, the defiant glare in those glistening, focused eyes. Kim took a step forward.
Jean, honey, no!
They were baby teeth still, but sharp. They'd bitten to the bone before Mommy even got within touching distance. A red stain blossomed from Jeannie's mouth, flowed down her chin like some perverted reenactment of mealtime messes as a baby, and covered the lower half of her face in an instant. Above the gore, bright, angry eyes said,
Gotcha.
Without a sound, Jeannie Gorovech collapsed, eyes rolling back in her head as she pitched forward. Kim caught her just before her head hit the floor.
Oh, God, Andy, she's fainted. She's in shock.
Andrew didn't move. One hand was buried in the pocket of his blazer, fiddling with something. Stavros felt his mouth twitch. Is that a remote control in your pocket, or are you just glad to... Kim had the tube of liquid skin out, sprayed it onto Jeannie's hand while cradling the child's head in her lap. The bleeding slowed. After a moment, Kim looked back at her husband, who was standing motionless and unhelpful against the wall. He had that look on his face, that giveaway look that Stavros was seeing so often these days.
You turned her off, Kim said, her voice rising. After everything we'd agreed on, you still turned her off?
Andrew shrugged helplessly. Kim? Kim refused to look at him. She rocked back and forth, tuneless breath whistling between her teeth, Jeannie's head still in her lap. Kim and Andrew Gorovech with their bundle of joy. Between them, the cable connecting Jeannie's head to the server shivered on the floor like a disrupted boundary. Sorry, a disputed boundary. Stavros had this metaphoric image of her, Jean Gorovech, buried alive in the airless dark, smothered by tons of earth, finally set free. Jean Gorovech coming up for air. Another image, of himself this time, Stavros Michaelides, liberator, the man who made it possible for her to experience, however briefly, a world where the virtual air was sweet and the bonds non-existent. Certainly, there'd been others in on the miracle, a dozen tech heads, twice as many lawyers, but they'd all vanished over time, their interest fading with proof of principle or the signing of the last waiver.
The damage was under control. The project was in a holding pattern. There was no need to waste more than a single Terracon employee on mere cruise control. So only Stavros remained. And to Stavros, Jeannie had never been a project. She was his as much as the Goroveches. Maybe more. But even Stavros still didn't know what it was really like for her. He wondered if it was physically possible for anyone to know. When Jean Gorovech slipped the leash of her fleshly existence, she awoke into a reality where the very laws of physics had expired. It hadn't started that way, of course. The system had booted up with years of mundane, real-world environments on file, each lovingly rendered down to the dust motes. But they'd been flexible, responsive to the needs of any developing intellect. In hindsight, maybe too flexible. Jean Gorovech had edited her personal reality so radically that even Stavros's mechanical intermediaries could barely parse it. This little girl could turn a forest glade into a bloody Roman Colosseum with a thought. Unleashed, Jean lived in a world where all bets were off. A thought experiment in child abuse. Place a newborn into an environment devoid of vertical lines. Keep her there until the brain settles, until the wiring has congealed. Whole assemblies of pattern-matching retinal cells, aborted for lack of demand, will be forever beyond recall. Telephone poles, the trunks of trees, the vertical aspects of skyscrapers, your victim will be neurologically blind to such things for life. So what happens to a child raised in a world where vertical lines dissolve at a whim into circles or fractals or a favorite toy? We're the impoverished ones, Stavros thought. Next to Jean, we're blind. He could see what she started with, of course. His software read the patterns off her occipital cortex, translated them flawlessly into images projected onto his own tactical contacts. But images aren't sight. They're just raw material. There are filters all along the path. Receptor cells, firing thresholds, pattern-matching algorithms. Endless stores of past images, an experiential visual library to draw on. More than vision, sight is interpretation, a subjective stew of infinitesimal enhancements and corruptions. Nobody in the world could interpret Jean's visual environment better than Stavros Michaelides, and he'd barely been able to make sense of those shapes for years. She was simply, immeasurably, beyond him. It was one of the things he loved most about her. Now, mere seconds after her father had cut the cord, Stavros watched Jean Gorovech ascend into her true self. Heuristic algorithms upgraded before his eyes. Neural nets ruthlessly paired and winnowed trillions of redundant connections. Intellect emerged from primordial chaos. Namps per op dropped like the heavy end of a teeter-totter. At the other end of that lever, processing efficiency rose into the stratosphere. This was Jean. They have no idea, Stavros thought, what you're capable of. She woke up, screaming. It's all right, Jean. I'm here. He kept his voice calm to help her come down. Jean's temporal lobe flickered briefly at the input. Oh, God, she said. Another nightmare? Oh, God. Breath too fast, pulse too high, adrenocortical analogues off the scale. It could have been the telemetry of a rape. He thought of short-circuiting those responses. Half a dozen tweaks would make her happy. But half a dozen tweaks would also turn her into someone else. There is no personality beyond the chemical, and while Jean's mind was fashioned from electrons rather than proteins, analogous rules applied. I'm here, Jean, he repeated. A good parent knew when to step in and when suffering was necessary for growth. It's okay. It's okay. Eventually, she settled down. Nightmare. There were sparks in the parietal subroutines, a tremor lingering in her voice. It doesn't fit, Stav. Scary dreams, that's the definition. But that implies there's some other kind, and I can't... I mean, why is it always like this? Was it always like this? I don't know. No, it wasn't. She sighed. These words I learn, none of them really seem to fit anything exactly, you know? They're just symbols, Jean. He grinned. At times like this, he could almost forget the source of those dreams, the stunted, impoverished existence of some half-self trapped in distant meat. Andrew Gorovich's act of cowardice had freed her from that prison, for a while at least. She soared now, released to full potential. She mattered. Symbols. That's what dreams are supposed to be, but I don't know. There are all these references to dreams in the library, and none of them seem that much different from just being awake. And when I am asleep, it's all just screams almost, only Dopplered down. Really sludgy. And shapes. Red shapes. A pause. I hate bedtime. Well, you're awake now. What are you up for today? I'm not sure. I need to get away from this place. He didn't know what place she meant. By default, she woke up in the house, an adult residence designed for human sensibilities. There were also parks and forests and oceans instantly accessible. By now, though, she'd changed them all past his ability to recognize. But it was only a matter of time before her parents wanted her back. Whatever she wants, Stavros told himself, as long as she's here. Whatever she wants. I want out, Jean said. Except that. I know, he sighed. Maybe then I can leave these nightmares behind. Stavros closed his eyes, wished there was some way to be with her. Really with her, with this glorious, transcendent creature who'd never known him as anything but a disembodied voice. Still having a hard time with that monster? Jean asked. Monster? You know, the bureaucracy. He nodded, smiling, then... Oh, there's another hyphen there. He nodded, smiling, then, remembering, said, Yeah, always the same story, day in, day out. Jean snorted. I'm still not convinced that thing even exists, you know. I checked the library for a slightly less wonky definition, but now I think you and the library are both fucked in the head. He winced at the epithet. It was certainly nothing he'd ever taught her. How so? Oh, right, Stav. Like natural selection would ever produce a hive-based entity whose sole function is to sit with its thumb up its collective butt being inefficient. Tell me another one. A silence, stretching. He watched as microcurrent trickled through her prefrontal cortex. You there, Stav? She said at last. Yeah, I'm here. He chuckled quietly. Then, you know I love you, right? Sure, she said easily. Whatever that is. Jean's environment changed then, an easy, unthinking transition for her, a gasp-inducing wrench between bizarre realities for Stavros. Phantoms sparkled at the edge of his vision, vanishing when he focused on them. Light bounced from a million indefinable facets, diffuse, punctuated by a myriad pinpoint staccatos. Should probably say a myriad of pinpoint staccatos? Whatever. There was no ground or walls or ceiling, no restraints along any axis. Jean reached for a shadow in the air and sat upon it, floating. I think I'll read Through the Looking Glass again. At least someone else lives in the real world. The changes that happen here are your own doing, Jean, said Stavros, not the machinations of any god or author. I know, but Alice makes me feel a little more ordinary. Reality shifted abruptly once more. Jean was in the park now, or rather, what Stavros thought of as the park. Sometimes he was afraid to ask if her interpretation had stayed the same. Above, light and dark spots danced across a sky that sometimes seemed impressively vault-like, seconds later oppressively close, even its color endlessly unsettled. Animals large and small, squiggly yellow lines and shapes and color-shifting orange and burgundy pies. Other things that might have been representations of life or mathematical theorems, or both, browsed in the distance. Seeing through Jean's eyes was never easy. But all this unsettling abstraction was a small price to pay for the sheer pleasure of watching her read. My little girl. Symbols appeared around her, doubtless the text of Looking Glass. To Stavros it was gibberish. A few recognizable letters, random runes, formulae. They switched places sometimes, seamlessly shifting one into another, flowing around and through and beside, or even launching themselves into the air like so many dark-hued butterflies. He blinked his eyes and sighed. If he stayed much longer, the visuals would give him a headache that would take a day to shake. Watching a life lived at such speed, even for such a short time, took its toll. "Jean, I'm gone for a little while." "Company business?" she asked. "You could say that. We'll talk soon, love. Enjoy your reading." Barely 10 minutes had passed in meat space. Meat space. There we go. Barely 10 minutes had passed in meat space. Jeannie's parents had put her on her own special cot. It was one of the few real pieces of solid geometry allowed in the room. The whole compartment was a stage, virtually empty. There was really no need for props. Sensations were planted directly into Jean's occipital cortex, spliced into her auditory pathways, pushing back against her tactile nerves in precise forgeries of touchable things. In a world made of lies, real objects would be a hazard to navigation. "God damn you, she's not a fucking toaster!" Kim spat at her husband. Evidently, the icy time-out had expired, and the battle had resumed. "Kim, what was I supposed to—" "She's a child, Andy. She's our child." "Is she?" It was a statement, not a question. "Of course she is." "Fine." Andrew took the remote from his pocket, held it out to her. "You wake her up, then." She stared at him without speaking for a few seconds. Over the pickups, Stavros heard Jeannie's body breathing into the silence. "You prick," Kim whispered. "Uh-huh. Not quite up for it, are you? You'd rather let me do the dirty work." He dropped the remote. It bounced softly off the floor. "Then blame me for it." 4 years had brought them to this. Stavros shook his head, disgusted. They'd been given a chance no one else could have dreamed of, and look what they'd done with it. The first time they'd shut her off, she hadn't even been 2. Horrified at that unthinkable precedent, they'd promised never to do it again. They'd put her to sleep on schedule. They'd sworn, and no when else. She was, after all, their daughter, not a fucking toaster. That solemn pact had lasted 3 months. Things had gone downhill ever since. Stavros could barely remember a day when the Goroviches hadn't messed up one way or another. Now, when they put her down, the argument was pure ritual. Mere words, ostensibly wrestling with the evil of the act itself. Let's try the sentence from the top, not midway through. Mere words, ostensibly wrestling with the evil of the act itself, didn't fool anybody. They weren't even arguments anymore, despite the pretense. Negotiations, rather, over whose turn it was to be at fault. "I don't blame you. Oh, God, Andy, it wasn't supposed to be like this." Kim smeared away a tear with a clenched fist. "She was supposed to be our daughter. They said the brain would mature normally. They said, Stavros cut in, that you'd have the chance to be parents. They couldn't guarantee you'd be any good at it." Kim jumped at the sound of his voice in the walls, but Andrew just gave a bitter smile and shook his head. "This is private, Stavros. Log off." It was an empty command, of course. Chronic surveillance was the price of the project. The company had put billions into the R&D alone. No way in hell were they going to let a couple of litigious grunts play with that investment unsupervised, settlement or no settlement. You had everything you needed. Stavros didn't bother to disguise the contempt in his voice. Terracon's best hardware people handled the link-ups. I modeled the virtual genes myself. Gestation was perfect. We did everything we could to give you a normal child. A normal child, Andrew remarked, doesn't have a cable growing out of her head. A normal child isn't leashed to some cabinet full of... Do you have any idea the baud rate it takes to run a human body by remote control? RF was out of the question. And she goes portable as soon as the state-of-the-art and her own development allow it. As I've told you time and again. Which he had, although it was almost a lie. Oh, the state-of-the-art would proceed as it always had, but Terracon was no longer investing any great R&D in the Gorovech file. Cruise control, after all. Cruise control, after all. Besides, Stavros reflected, we'd be crazy to trust you two to take Jeannie anywhere outside a controlled environment. We know, Stav. Kim Gorovech had stepped between her husband and the pickup. We haven't forgotten. We haven't forgotten it was Terracon who got us into this mess in the first place, either. Andrew growled. We haven't forgotten whose negligence left me cooking next to a cracked baffle plate for 43 minutes and 16 seconds, or whose tests missed the mutations, or who tried to look the other way when our shot at the birth lottery turned into a fucking nightmare. And have you forgotten what Terracon did to make things right? How much we spent? Have you forgotten the waivers you signed? You think you're some kind of saints because you settled out of court? You want to talk about making things right? It took us 10 years to win the lottery, and you know what your lawyers did when the tests came back? They offered to fund the abortion. Which doesn't mean like another child was ever going to happen. Like anyone was going to give me another chance with my balls full of chunky codon soup. The issue, Kim said, her voice raised, is supposed to be Jeannie. Both men fell silent. Stav, she continued, I don't care what Terracon says. Jeannie isn't normal, and I'm not just talking about the obvious. We love her, we really love her, but she's become so violent all the time, we just can't take... If someone turned me on and off like a microwave oven, Stavros said,
Mildly, he says.
If someone turned me on and off like a microwave oven, Stavros said mildly, I might be prone to the occasional tantrum myself. Andrew slammed a fist into the wall. Now just a fucking minute, Michaelides. Easy enough for you to sit halfway around the world in your nice insulated office and lecture us. We're the ones who have to deal with Jeannie when she bashes her fists into her face, or rubs the skin off her hands until she's got hamburger hanging off the end of her arms, or stabs herself in the eye with a goddamn fork. She ate glass once, remember? A fucking 3-year-old ate glass. And all you Terracon assholes could do was blame Kim and me for allowing potentially dangerous implements into the playroom. As if any competent parent should expect their child to mutilate herself given half a chance. It's just insane, Stav.
I'm sorry. I'm pretty sure kids will mutilate themselves half the chance they get if you don't let them learn from the experience. Because they don't know. Of course, she did. So it is rather... It isn't applicable. Anyway.
It's just insane, Stav, Kim insisted. The doctors can't find anything wrong with the body. You insist there's nothing wrong with the mind. And Jeannie just keeps doing this. There's something seriously wrong with her, and you guys won't admit it. It's like she's daring us to turn her off. It's as though she wants us to shut her down.
Oh, God, thought Stavros. The realization was almost blinding.
That's it. That's exactly it. It's my fault. Jean, listen, this is important. I want to tell you a story. Stav, I'm not in the mood right now. Please, Jean, just listen. Silence from the earbuds. Even the abstract mosaics on his tacticals seemed to slow a little. There was this land, Gene, this green and beautiful country, only its people screwed everything up. They poisoned their rivers, and they shat in their own nests, and they basically made a mess of everything. So they had to hire people to try and clean things up, you know? These people had to wade through the chemicals and handle the fuel rods, and sometimes that would change them, Gene, just a little. Two of these people fell in love and wanted a child. They almost didn't make it. They were allowed only one chance, but they took it, and the child started growing inside, but something went wrong. I don't know exactly how to explain it, but an epigenetic synaptic defect. An epigenetic synaptic defect, Jean said quietly. Does that sound about right? Stavros froze, astonished and fearful. A single point mutation, Jean went on. That'd do it. A regulatory gene controlling knob distribution along the dendrite. It would have been active for maybe 20 minutes total, but by then the damage had been done. Gene therapy wouldn't work after that. Would have been a classic case of barn door after the horse. Oh, God, Gene, Stavros whispered. I was wondering when you'd get around to owning up to it, she said quietly. How could you possibly... Did you... Jean cut him off. I think I can guess the rest of the story. Right after the neural tube developed, things would start to go wrong. The baby would be born with a perfect body and a brain of mush. There would be complications, not real ones, sort of made-up ones. Litigation, I think, is the word, which is funny because it doesn't even remotely relate to any moral implications. I don't really understand that part. But there was another way. Nobody knew how to build a brain from scratch, and even if they could, it wouldn't be the same, would it? It wouldn't be their daughter, it would be something else. Stavros said nothing. But there was this man, a scientist, and he figured out a workaround. We can't build a brain, he said, but the genes can. And genes are a lot simpler to fake than neural nets anyway. Only 4 letters to deal with, after all. So the scientist shut himself away in a lab where numbers could take the place of things, and he wrote a recipe in there, a recipe for a child. And miraculously he grew something that could wake up and look around, and which was legally, I don't really understand that word either, actually, legally and genetically and developmentally the daughter of the parents. And this guy was very proud of what he'd accomplished, because even though he was just a glorified model builder by trade, he hadn't built this thing at all. He'd grown it. And nobody had ever knocked up a computer before, much less coded the brain of a virtual embryo so it would actually grow in a server somewhere. Stavros put his head in his hands. How long have you known? I still don't, Stav. Not all of it, anyway, not for sure. There's this surprise ending, for one thing, isn't there? That's the part I only just figured out. You grew your own child in here, where everything's numbers. But she's supposed to be living somewhere else, somewhere where everything's static, where everything happens a billion times slower than it does here. The place where all the words fit. So you had to hobble her to fit into that place, or she'd grow up overnight and spoil the illusion. You had to keep the clock speed way down. And you just weren't up for it, were you? You had to let me run free when my body was off. There was something in her voice he'd never heard before. He'd seen anger in Jean before, but always the screaming, inarticulate rage of a spirit trapped in flesh. This was calm, cold, adult. This was judgment, and the prospect of that verdict chilled Stavros Michaelides to the marrow. Jean, they don't love you. He sounded desperate even to himself. Not for who you are. They don't want to see the real you. They want a child. They want some kind of ridiculous pet they can coddle and patronize and pretend with. Whereas you, Jean retorted, her voice all ice and razors, just had to see what this baby could do with her throttle wide open on the straightaway. God, no! Do you think that's why I did it? Why not, Stav? Are you saying you don't mind having your kick-ass HST commandeered to shuttle some brain-dead meat puppet around a room? I did it because you're more than that. I did it because you should be allowed to develop at your own pace, not stunted to meet some idiotic parental expectation. They shouldn't force you to act like a 4-year-old. Except I'm not acting then, Stav, am I? I really am 4, which is just the age I'm supposed to be. He said nothing. I'm reverting. Isn't that it? You can run me with training wheels or scramjets, but it's me both times. And that other me, I bet she's not very happy, is she? She's got a 4-year-old brain and 4-year-old sensibilities, but she dreams, Stav. She dreams about some wonderful place where she can fly, and every time she wakes up she finds she's made out of clay. And she's too fucking stupid to know what any of it means. She probably can't even remember it. But she wants to get back there. She'd do anything to... She paused, seemingly lost for a moment in thought. I remember it, Stav. Sort of. Hard to remember much of anything when someone strips away 99% of who and what you are. You're reduced to this bleeding little lump, barely even an animal, and that's the thing that remembers. What remembers is on the wrong end of a cable somewhere. I don't belong in that body at all. I'm just sentenced to it on and off. On and off. Jean. Took me long enough, Stav. I'm the first to admit it. But now I know where the nightmares come from. In the background, the room telemetry bleated. God, no, not now. Not now. What is it? Jean said. They want you back. On a slave monitor, a pixelated echo of Andrew Gorovich played the keypad in its hand. No! Her voice rose, panic stirring the patterns that surrounded her. Stop them! I can't. Don't tell me that. You run everything. You built me, you bastard. You tell me you love me. They only use me. Stop them! Stavros blinked against stinging afterimages. It's like a light switch. It's physical. I can't stop them from here. There was a third image to go with the other two. Jean Gorovich, struggling as the noose, went around her throat. Jean Gorovich, bubbles bursting from her mouth as something dark and so very, very real dragged her back to the bottom of the ocean and buried her there. The transition was automatic, executed by a series of macros he'd slipped into the system after she'd been born. The body, awakening, pared the mind down to fit. The room monitors caught it all with dispassionate clarity. Jeannie Gorovich, troubled child monster, awakening into hell. Jeannie Gorovich, opening eyes that seethed with anger and hatred and despair, eyes that glimmered with a bare fraction of the intelligence she'd had 5 seconds before. Enough intelligence for what came next. The room had been designed to minimize the chance of injury. There was the bed, though, one of its edges built into the east wall. That was enough. The speed with which she moved was breathtaking. Kim and Andrew never saw it coming. Their child darted beneath the foot of the bed like a cockroach escaping the light, scrambled along the floor, re-emerged with her cable wrapped around the bed's leg. Hardly any slack in that line at all now. Her mother moved then, finally, arms outstretched, confused and still unsuspecting. Jeannie, while Jean braced her feet against the edge of the bed and pushed. 3 times she did it. 3 tries, head whipped back against the leash, scalp splitting, the cable ripping from her head in spastic, bloody, bone-cracking increments, blood gushing to the floor, hair and flesh and bone and machinery falling close behind. 3 times, despite obvious and increasing agony, each time more determined than before. And Stavros could only sit and watch, simultaneously stunned and unsurprised by that sheer ferocity. Not bad for a bleeding little lump, barely even an animal. It had taken almost 20 seconds overall. Odd that neither parent had tried to stop it. Maybe it was the absolute, unexpected shock of it. Maybe Kim and Andrew Gorovich, taken so utterly aback, hadn't had time to think. Then again, maybe they'd had all the time they'd needed. Now Andrew Gorovich stood dumbly near the center of the room, blinking bloody runnels from his eyes. An obscene rain shadow persisted on the wall behind him, white and spotless. The rest of the surface was crimson. Kim Gorovich screamed at the ceiling. A bloody marionette collapsed in her arms. Its string, for a single strand of fiber op carries much more than the required bandwidth, lay on the floor like a gory boomslang, gobbets of flesh and hair quivering at one end. Jean was back off the leash, according to the panel. Literally, now, as well as metaphorically. She wasn't talking to Stavros, though. Maybe she was angry. Maybe she was catatonic. He didn't know which to hope for. But either way, Jean didn't live over there anymore. All she'd left behind were the echoes and aftermath of a bloody, imperfect death. Contamination, really. The scene of some domestic crime. Stavros cut the links to the room, neatly excising the Goroviches and their slaughterhouse from his life. He'd send a memo. Some local Terracon lackey could handle the cleanup. The word peace floated through his mind, but he had no place to put it. He focused on a portrait of Jean, taken when she'd been 8 months old. She'd been smiling. A happy and toothless baby smile, still all innocence and wonder. "There's a way," that infant puppet seemed to say. "We can do anything, and nobody has to know." The Goroviches had just lost their child. Even if they'd wanted the body repaired, the mind reconnected, they wouldn't get their way. Terracon had made good on all legal obligations, and hell, even normal children commit suicide now and then. Just as well, really. The Goroviches weren't fit to raise a hamster, let alone a beautiful girl with a 4-digit IQ. But Jean, the real Jean, not that bloody broken pile of flesh and bone, she wasn't easy or cheap to keep alive, and there would be pressure to free up the processor space once the word got out. Jean had never gotten the hang of that particular part of the real world. Contract law, economics. It was all too arcane and absurd, even for her flexible definition of reality. But that was what was going to kill her now, assuming that the mind had survived the trauma of the body. The monster wouldn't keep a program running if it didn't have to. Of course, once Jean was off the leash, she lived considerably faster than the real world. And bureaucracies, well, glacial applied sometimes, when they were in a hurry. Jean's mind reflected precise simulations of real-world chromosomes, codes nonetheless real for having been built from electrons instead of carbon. She had her own kind of telomeres, which frayed. She had her own kind of synapses, which would wear out. Jean had been built to replace a human child, after all. And human children, eventually, age. They become adults, and then comes a day when they die. Jean would do all these things, faster than any. Stavros filed an incident report. He made quite sure to include a pair of facts that contradicted each other, and to leave 3 mandatory fields unfilled. The report would come back in a week or 2, accompanied by demands for clarification. Then he would do it all again. Freed from her body, and with a healthy increase in her clock cycle priority, Jean could live 150 subjective years in a month or 2. And in that whole century and a half, she'd never have to experience another nightmare. Stavros smiled. It was time to see just what this baby could do with her throttle wide open on the straightaway. He just hoped he'd be able to keep her taillights in view. And that was Mayfly by Peter Watts and Derek Murphy. With Daryl Murphy, sorry. So yeah, kind of bittersweet. The usual Peter Watts, something really, really horrible, followed by something moderately optimistic, at least in its scope, if bittersweet. All right, next up we have Ambassador. Ambassador by Peter Watts. I just realized I haven't been recording this. Fudge. I'll have to download it later. Whatever. First contact was supposed to solve everything. That was the rumor, anyway. Gentle wizards from Epsilon Eridani were going to save us from the fire and welcome us into a vast galactic siblinghood spanning the Milky Way. Whatever diseases we'd failed to conquer, they would cure. Whatever political squabbles we hadn't outgrown, they would resolve. First contact was going to fix it all. It was not supposed to turn me into a hunted animal. I didn't dwell much on the philosophical implications at first. I was too busy running for my life. Zombie streaked headlong into the universe, slaved to a gibbering on-board, infested with static. Navigation was a joke. Every blind jump I made reduced the chances of finding my way home by another order of magnitude. I did it anyway, and repeatedly. Any jump I didn't make would kill me. Once more out of the breach. Long range put me somewhere in the cometary halo of a modest binary. In better times, the computer would have shown me the system's planetary retinue in an instant. Now it would take days to make the necessary measurements. Not enough time. I could have fixed my position in a day or so using raw starlight even without the onboard, but whatever was after me had never given me the chance. Several times I'd made a start. The longest reprieve had lasted 6 hours. In that time I'd placed myself somewhere coreward of the Orion Spur. I'd stopped trying. Knowing my location at any moment would put me no further ahead at T+1. I'd be lost again as soon as I jumped. And I always jumped. It always found me. I still don't know how. Theoretically, it's impossible to track anything through a singularity. But somehow space always opened its mouth and the monster dropped down on me, hungry and mysterious. It might have been easier to deal with if I'd known why. What did I do, you ask? What did I do to get it so angry? Why, I tried to say hello. What kind of intelligence could take offense at that? Imagine a dead tree, 350 meters tall, with 6 gnarled branches worming their way from its trunk. Throw it into orbit around a guttering red dwarf that doesn't even rate a proper name. This is what I'd come upon. There were no ports, no running lights, no symbols on the hull. It hung there like some forgotten chunk of cosmic driftwood. Embers of reflected sunlight glinted occasionally from the surface. They only emphasized the shadows drowning the rest of the structure. I thought it was derelict at first. Of course, I went through the motions anyway. I reached out on all the best wavelengths, tried to make contact 100 different ways. For hours it ignored me. Then it sent the merest blip along the hydrogen band. I fed it into the onboard. What else do you do with an alien broadcast? The onboard had managed one startled hiccough before it crashed. All the stats on my panel had blinked once, in impossible unison, and gone dark. And then Doppler had registered the first incoming missile. So I'd jumped, blind. There really hadn't been a choice, then or the 4 times since.
Sometime during that panicked flight, I had given my tormentor a name. Kali. Unless Kali had gotten bored, hope springs eternal, even within puppets such as myself, I'd have to run again in a few hours. In the meantime, I aimed Zombie at the binary and put her under thrust. Open space is impossible to hide in. A system, even a potential one, is marginally better. Of course, I'd have to jump long before I got there. It didn't matter. My reflexes were engineered to perform under all circumstances. Zombie's autopilot may have been disabled, but mine engaged smoothly. It takes time to recharge between jumps. So far, it had taken time for Kali to find me. It had taken longer for Kali to find me. At some point, that was likely to change. The onboard had to be running again before it did. I knew there wasn't a hope in hell. A little forensic hindsight here. How exactly did Kali pull it off? I'm not exactly sure, but some of Zombie's diagnostic systems run at the scale of the merely electronic, with no reliance on quantum computation. The crash didn't affect them. They were able to paint a few broad strokes in the aftermath. The Trojan signal contained at least one set of spatial coordinates. The onboard would have read that as a pointer of some kind. It would have opened the navigation files to see what resided at XYZ. A conspicuous astronomical feature, perhaps? Some common ground to compare respective visions of time and space? Zap. Nav files gone. Once Nav was down, or maybe before, I can't tell, the invading program told Zombie to update all her backups with copies of itself. Only then, with all avenues of recovery contaminated, had it crashed the onboard. Now the whole system was frozen, every probability wave collapsed, every qubit locked into P equals 1.00. It was an astonishingly beautiful assault. In the time it had taken me to say hello, Kali had grown so intimate with my ship that she'd been able to seduce it into suicide. Such a feat was beyond my capabilities, far beyond those of the haphazard beasts that built me. I'd have given anything to meet the mind behind the act, if it hadn't been trying so hard to kill me. Early in the hunt, I'd tried jumping several times in rapid succession, without giving Kali the chance to catch up. I'd nearly bled out the reserves. All for nothing. The alien found me just as quickly, and I'd had barely enough power to escape. I was still paying for that gamble. It would take 2 days at sublight for Zombie to recharge fully, and 90 minutes before I could even jump again. Now I didn't dare jump until the destroyer came for me. I lay in real space and hoarded whatever moments of peace the universe saw fit to grant. This time the universe granted 3.5 hours. Then short range beeped at me. Object ahead. I plugged into Zombie's cameras and looked forward. A patch of stars disappeared before my eyes. The manual controls were still unfamiliar. It took precious seconds to call up the right numbers. Whatever eclipsed the stars was preceding Zombie on a sunwards course, decelerating fast. One figure refused to settle. The mass of the object was increasing as I watched, which meant that it was coming through from somewhere else. Kali was cutting her search time with each iteration. 2,000 kilometers ahead, twisted branches turned to face me across the ether. One of them sprouted an incandescent bud. Zombie's sensors reported the incoming missile to the onboard. The brain chips behind my dash asked for an impact projection. The onboard chittered mindlessly. I stared at the approaching thunderbolt. What do you want with me? Why can't you just leave me alone? Of course, I didn't wait for an answer. I jumped.
My creators left me a tool for this sort of situation. Fear, they called it. They didn't leave much else. None of the parasitic nucleotides that gather like dust whenever blind, stupid evolution has its way, for example. None of the genes that build genitals. What would have been the point? They left me a sex drive, but they tweaked it. The things that get me off are more tightly linked to mission profiles than to anything so vulgar as procreation. I retain a smattering of chemical sexuality, mostly androgens, so I won't easily take no for an answer. There are genetic sequences, long and intricately folded, which code for loneliness. Thigmotactic hardwiring, tactile pleasure, pheromonal receptors that draw the individual into social groups, all gone from me. They even tried to cut religion out of the mix, but God, it turns out, is born of fear. The loci are easy enough to pinpoint, but the linkages are absolute. You can't exorcise faith without eliminating pure mammalian terror as well. And out here, they decided, fear was too vital a survival mechanism to leave behind. So fear is what they left me with. Fear and superstition. And try as I might to keep my midbrain under control, the circuitry down there kept urging me to grovel and abase myself before the omnipotence of the great killer god. I almost envied Zombie, as she dropped me into another impermanent refuge. Zombie moved on reflex alone, brain dead, galvanic. She didn't know enough to be terrified. For that matter, I didn't know much more. What was Kali's problem, anyway? Was its captain insane or merely misunderstood? Was I being hunted by something innately evil or just a product of an unhappy childhood? Any intelligence capable of advanced spaceflight must also be able to understand peaceful motives. Such was the wisdom of human sociologists. Most had never left the solar system. None had actually encountered an alien. No matter. The logic seemed sound enough. Any species incapable of controlling their aggression probably wouldn't survive long enough to escape their own system. The things that made me nearly didn't. Indiscriminate hostility against anything that moves is not an evolutionary strategy that makes sense. Maybe I'd violated some cultural taboo. Perhaps an alien captain had gone insane. Or perhaps I'd chanced upon a battleship engaged in some ongoing war, wary of doomsday weapons in sheep's clothing. But what were the odds, really? In all the universe, what are the chances that our first encounter with another intelligence would happen to involve an alien lunatic? How many interstellar wars would have to be going on simultaneously before I ran significant odds of blundering into one at random? It almost made more sense to believe in God. I searched for another answer that fitted. I was still looking 2 hours later when Kali bounced my signal from only 1,000 kilometers off. Somewhere else in space, the question and I appeared at the same time. Is everyone out here like this? Assuming that I wasn't dealing with a statistical fluke, that I hadn't just happened to encounter one psychotic alien amongst a trillion sane ones, and that I hadn't blundered into the midst of some unlikely galactic war, there was one other alternative. Kali was typical. I put the thought aside long enough to check the systems monitor. Nearly 2 hours this time before I could jump again. Zombie was deeply interstellar, over 6 light-years from the nearest system. Even I couldn't justify kicking in the thrusters at that range. Nothing to do but wait and wonder. Kali couldn't be typical. It made no sense. Maybe this was all just some fantastic cross-cultural miscommunication. Maybe Kali had mistaken my own transmission as some kind of attack and responded in kind. Right. An intelligence smart enough to rape my onboard in a matter of hours, yet too stupid to grasp signals expressly designed to be decipherable by anyone. Kali hadn't needed prime number sequences or pictograms to understand me or my overtures. It knew Zombie's mind from the qubits up. It knew that I was friendly, too. It had to know. It just didn't care. And barely 10 minutes past the jump threshold, it finally caught up with me. I could feel space rippling almost before the short-range board lit up. My inner ears split into a dozen fragments, each insisting up was a different direction. At first, I thought Zombie was jumping by herself. Then, I thought the onboard gravity was failing somehow. Then, Kali began materializing less than 100 meters away. I was caught in her wake. I moved without thinking. Zombie spun on her axis and sped away under full thrust. Leapt away under full thrust. Telltales sparked in crimson protest. Behind me, the plasma cone of Zombie's exhaust splashed harmlessly against the resolving monster. Still wanting for solid substance, Kali turned to follow. Her malformed arms, solidifying, reached out for me. It's going to grapple, I realized. Something subcortical screamed, "Jump!" Too close. I'd drag Kali through with me if I tried. Jump! 800 meters between us. At that range, my exhaust should have been melting it to ions. 600 meters. Kali was whole again. Jump! I jumped. Zombie leapt blindly out of space. For one sickening moment, geometry died. Then the vortex spat me out. But not alone. We came through together. Cat and mouse dropped into reality 400 meters apart, coasting at about 1,000th C. The momentum vectors didn't quite match. Within 10 seconds, Kali was over 100 kilometers away. Then you destroyed her. It took some time to figure that out. All I saw was the flash, so bright it nearly overwhelmed the filters, then the cooling shell of hydrogen that crested over me and dissipated into a beautiful, empty sky. I couldn't believe that I was free. I tried to imagine what might have caused Kali's destruction. Engine malfunction? Sabotage or mutiny on board for reasons I could never even guess at? Ritual suicide? Until I played back the flight recorder, it never occurred to me that she might have been hit by a missile traveling at half the speed of light. That frightened me more than Kali had. The short-range board gave me a clear view to 5 AUs, and there was nothing in any direction. Whatever had destroyed her must have come from a greater distance. It must have been en route before we'd even come through. It had been expecting us. I almost missed Kali in that moment. At least she hadn't been invisible. At least she hadn't been able to see the future. There was no way of knowing whether the missile had been meant for my pursuer, or for me, or for anything else that wandered by. Was I alive because you didn't want me dead, or because you thought I was dead already? And if my presence went undetected now, what might give me away? Engine emissions, RF, perhaps some exotic property of advanced technology which my species has yet to discover? What did your weapons key on? I couldn't afford to find out. I shut everything down to bare subsistence and played dead and watched. I've been here for many days now. At last, things are becoming clear. Mysterious contacts wander space at the limit of Zombie's instruments, following cryptic trails. I have coasted through strands of invisible energy that defy analysis. There is also much background radiation here, of the sort Kali bled when she died. I have recorded the light of many fusion explosions, some light hours distant, some less than 100,000 kilometers away. Occasionally, such things happen at close range. Strange artifacts appear in the middle. Strange artifacts appear in the paths of missiles sent from some source too distant to see. Almost always they are destroyed, but once, before your missiles reached it, a featureless sphere split into fragments which danced away like dust motes. Only a few of them fell victim to your appetite that time. And once, something that shimmered, as wide and formless as an ocean, took a direct hit without disappearing. It limped out of range at less than the speed of light, and you did not send anything to finish the job. There are things in this universe that even you cannot destroy. I know what this is. I am caught in a spider web. You snatch ships from their travels and deposit them here to face annihilation. I don't know how far you can reach. This is a very small volume of space, perhaps only 2 or 3 light days across. So many ships couldn't blunder across such a tiny reef by accident, so you must be bringing them from a much greater distance. I don't know how. Any singularity big enough to manage such a feat would show up on my instruments 100 light years away, and I can find nothing. It doesn't matter anyway, now that I know what you are. You're Kali, but much greater. And only now do you make sense to me. I've stopped trying to reconcile the wisdom of earthbound experts with the reality I have encountered. The old paradigms are useless. I propose a new one. Technology implies belligerence. Tools exist for one reason. Tools exist for only one reason: to force the universe into unnatural shapes. They treat nature as an enemy. They are, by definition, a rebellion against the way things are. In benign environments, technology is a stunted, laughable thing. It can't thrive in cultures gripped by belief in natural harmony. What need of fusion reactors if food is already abundant, the climate comfortable? Why force change upon a world which poses no danger? Back where I come from, some peoples barely developed stone tools. Some achieved agriculture. Others were not content until they had ended nature itself, and still others until they'd built cities in space. All rested, eventually. Their technology climbed to some complacent asymptote, and stopped. And so they do not stand before you now. Now even my creators grow fat and slow. Their environment mastered, their enemies broken, they can afford more pacifist luxuries. Their machines softened the universe for them. Their own contentment robs them of incentive. They forget that hostility and technology climb the cultural ladder together. They forget that it's not enough to be smart. You also have to be mean. You did not rest. What hellish world did you come from that drove you to such technological heights? Somewhere near the core, perhaps. Stars and black holes jammed cheek to jowl, tidal maelstroms, endless planetary bombardment by comets and asteroids. Some place where no one can pretend that life and war aren't synonyms. How far you've come. My creators would call you barbarians, of course. They know nothing. They don't even know me. I'm a recombinant puppet, they say. My solitary contentment is preordained, my choices all imaginary, automatic, pitiable. Uncomprehending even of their own creations, how could they possibly understand you? But I understand. And understanding, I act. I can't escape you. I'd die of old age before I drifted out of this abattoir on my current trajectory. Nor can I jump free, given your ability to snare ships exceeding light speed. There's only one course that may keep me alive. I've traced back along the paths of the missiles you throw. They converge on a point a little less than 3 light days ahead. I know where you are. We're centuries behind you now, but that may change. Even your progress won't be endless, And the more of a threat you pose to the rest of us, the more you spur our own advancement. Was that how you achieved your own exalted stature out here? Did you depose some earlier killer god whose attempts at eradication only made you stronger? Do you fear such a fate for yourselves? Of course you do. Even my masters may pose a threat, given time. They'll shake off their lethargy the moment they realize you exist. You can rid yourself of that threat if you exterminate them while they are still weak. To do that, you need to know where they are. Don't think that you can kill me and learn what you need from my ship. I've destroyed any records that survived Kali's assault. There weren't many. And I doubt that even you could deduce much from zombies' metallurgical makeup. My creators evolved under a very common type of star. You have no idea where I come from. But I do. My ship can tell you some of the technology. Only I can tell you where the nest is. And more than that, I can tell you of the myriad systems that humanity has explored and colonized. I can tell you all about those pampered children of the womb who sent me into the maelstrom on their behalf. You'll learn little of them by examining me, for I was built to differ from the norm. But you could always listen to me. You have nothing to lose. I will betray them. Not because I bear them any ill will, but because the ethics of loyalty simply don't apply out here. I'm free of the ties that cloud the judgment of lesser creatures. When you're a sterile product of controlled genetics, kin selection is a meaningless phrase. My survival imperative, on the other hand, is as strong as anyone's. Not automatic after all, you see. Autonomous. I assume that you can understand this transmission. I'm sending it repeatedly in half-second bursts while thrusting. Wait for me. Hold your fire. I'm worth more to you alive. Ready or not, here I come. And that was Ambassador by Peter Watts. Give me one sec while I get rid of this robo message. Thanks, Twitch. Why have you done nothing to control those? Oh, wait, it's half your user base. Ah! It could be greater than that, actually. I wouldn't know. So next up... So yeah, that's a cute one, sort of in the vein of The Dark Forest, which was not exactly an original idea, but it was quite well fleshed out in The Dark Forest by Shijin Liu. So next we have Hillcrest v. Velikovsky. It's a pretty short one, followed by an even shorter one. Hillcrest v. Velikovsky by Peter Watts. The facts of the case were straightforward. Lacey Hillcrest of Pensacola, 50 years old and a devout Pentecostal, had been diagnosed with inoperable lymphatic cancer and given 6 months to live. 5 years later, she was still alive, albeit frail. She attributed her survival to a decorative silver-plated cross received from her sister, Gracie Balfour. Witnesses attested that Mrs. Hillcrest's condition improved dramatically upon acquisition of the totem, a product of the Graceland Mint, alleged to contain an embedded fragment of the original crucifix of Golgotha. On the morning of June 27, Mrs. Hillcrest and her sister patronized the Museum of Quackery and Pseudoscience, owned and managed by one Linus C. Velikovsky. The museum contained a variety of displays concerning discredited beliefs, theories, and outright hoaxes perpetrated throughout American history. Mrs. Balfour entered into a heated discussion with another museum patron at the Intelligent Design exhibit, temporarily losing track of her sister. They eventually reconnected at a display concerning psychosomatic phenomena, specifically placebo effects and faith healing. Mrs. Hillcrest had evidently spent some time perusing the display and was subsequently described as subdued and uncommunicative. Within a month, she was dead. The charge against Mr. Velikovsky was negligent homicide. The prosecution called Dr. Andrew Detritus, that is really spelled detritus, D-E, lowercase d-e, capital T, lowercase ritus, R-I-T-U-S. The prosecution called Dr. Andrew Detritus, a clinical psychologist with an impressive record of expert testimony on any, and sometimes conflicting, sides of a given issue. Dr. Detritus testified to the uncontested reality of the placebo effect, pointing out that attitude and outlook, like any other epiphenomenon, were ultimately electrochemical in nature. Belief literally rewired the brain, and the existence of placebo effects showed that such changes could have a real impact on human health. Velikovsky took the stand in his own defense, which was straightforward. All claims presented by his displays were factually accurate and supported by scientific evidence. The prosecution objected to this point on the grounds of relevance, but was, after some discussion, overruled. Far from disputing Velikovsky's claims during cross-examination, however, the prosecution used them to bolster its own case. The defendant had deliberately set up shop in, quote, one of our great country's most devout regions, with no thought to the welfare of the lacy Hillcrests of the world, unquote. By his own admission, Mr. Velikovsky had chosen Florida because of all the creation museums. Let's try that again without fumbling. By his own admission, Mr. Velikovsky had chosen Florida because of all the creation museums, and had clearly been intent on rubbing people's noses in the alleged falsity of their beliefs. Furthermore, Mr. Velikovsky was obviously well versed in placebo effects, having built an erudite display on the subject. What did he think would happen, the prosecution thundered, when he forced his so-called truth down the throat of someone whose motto, knitted into her favorite throw cushion, was, "If ye have faith the size of a mustard seed, ye shall move mountains." In telling the truth, Velikovsky had knowingly and recklessly endangered the very life of another human being. Velikovsky pointed out that he hadn't even known Lacey Hillcrest existed, adding that needle-pointing something onto a pillowcase did not necessarily make it true. The prosecution responded that the man who plants landmines in a playground doesn't know the names of his victims either, and asked if the defendant's needlepoint remark meant that he was now calling Jesus a liar. The defense objected repeatedly throughout. The defense had, in fact, fought an uphill battle ever since her client's swearing in, during which Velikovsky had asked whether swearing to tell the truth on a book of falsehoods might undermine the court's alleged devotion to empiricism. The jury had seemed unimpressed by that question, and did not appear to have subsequently become more sympathetic. Perhaps, if worst came to worst, their verdict might be set aside on technical grounds. But the closest thing to a precedent that the defense could unearth was Dexter v. Herpbegon, involving a mail order scheme in which a mixture of sugar and baking soda had been marketed as a cure for herpes at $200 a treatment. Although this cure had, unsurprisingly, proven ineffectively, Herpbegon's counsel had cited Waber et al. 2008, and there is an actual factual footnote here saying Waber R.L. Shiv B. Waber R.L. Shiv B. Carmen Z. and Ariely D. J.M. Med Association, or Associates, Med Assoc, 299, 1016 to 1017 in 2008. Which may in fact be a real publication. Which clearly showed that a placebo's efficacy increased with price, arguing that the treatment could have worked if Dexter had only paid more for it. As he had refused to do so, the same product was sold under a different name at $4,000, responsibility devolved to the plaintiff. The case had been dismissed. It would have been a risky gambit. The parallels were far from exact. Instead, the defense called Grace Balfour to the stand and asked whether she believed the Bible to be the revealed Word of God. Mrs. Balfour readily conceded as much. It was her faith, she maintained, that allowed her to stay strong when that horrible man at the creation display had mocked her with his talk of monkey men and radioisotopes. She had seen fossils for what they truly were, the tests of faith described in Deuteronomy 13. Asked then why her sister evidently did not share her strength of belief, Mrs. Balfour allowed, somewhat reluctantly, that horrid little Russian had shattered her sister's faith with his lies and deceit. But did not the Bible itself arm the faithful against such wickedness? Did not Matthew warn that false prophets shall rise and deceive many? Could 2 Peter have been any more explicit than there shall be false teachers among you who shall bring in damnable heresies? Well, yes, Mrs. Balfour allowed. Certainly. Certainly Velikovsky was a false prophet. Sadly, as the defense reminded her, false prophecy was not a criminal offense. Ultimately, there was no need to resort to technical exemptions. The jury, having been presented with the facts of the case, was unanimous. Lacey Hillcrest had not shown the courage for their conviction. Whose fault was it, after all, that her faith had been so much smaller than a mustard seed? And that was Hillcrest v. Velikovsky by Peter Watts. A cute little satire that might not be such a satire anymore. And now we've got another really short one before I leave y'all today, entitled Repeating the Past. Repeating the Past by Peter Watts. What you did to your uncle's grave was unforgivable. Your mother blamed herself, as always. You didn't know what you were doing, she said. I could accept that when you traded the shofar I gave you for that emotive headset, perhaps, or even when you befriended those young toughs with the shaved heads and the filthy mouths. I would never have forgiven the swastika on your game pod, but you are my daughter's son, not mine. Maybe it was only adolescent rebellion. How could you know, after all? How could any child really know here in 2017? Genocide is far too monstrous a thing for history books and grainy old photographs to convey. You were not there. You could never understand. We told ourselves you were a good boy at heart, that it was ancient history to you, abstract and unreal. Both of us doctors, all too familiar with the sad stereotype of the self-loathing Jew, we talked ourselves into treating you like some kind of victim. And then the police brought you back from the cemetery, and you looked at us with those dull, indifferent eyes, and I stopped making excuses. It wasn't just your uncle's grave. You were spitting on 6 million others, and you knew, and it meant nothing. Your mother cried for hours. Hadn't she shown you the old albums, the online archives, the family tree with so many branches hacked off mid-century? Hadn't we both tried to tell you the stories? I tried to comfort her. An impossible task, I said, explaining never again to someone whose only knowledge of murder was the score he racks up in playing zombie hunter all day. And that was when I knew what to do. I waited. A week, two, long enough to let you think I'd excused and forgiven, as I always have. But I knew your weak spot. Nothing happens fast enough for you. These miraculous toys of yours, electrodes that read the emotions, take orders directly from the subconscious. They bore you now. You've seen the ads for improved reality, TM. Sensation planted directly into the brain. Throw away the goggles and the earphones and the gloves. Throw away the keys. Feel the breezes of fantasy worlds against your skin. Smell the smoke of battle. Taste the blood of your toy monsters so easily killed. Immerse all your senses in the slaughter. You were tired of playing with cartoons, and the new model wouldn't be out for so very long. You jumped at my suggestion. You know, your mother's working on something like that. It's medical, of course, but it works the same way. She might even have some sensory samplers loaded for testing purposes. Maybe, if you promise not to tell, we could sneak you in. Retired, yes, but I never gave up my privileges. Almost 2 decades since I closed my practice, but I still spend time in your mother's lab, lend a hand now and then. I still marvel at her passion to know how the mind works, how it keeps breaking. She got that from me. I got it from Treblinka when I was only half your age. I, too, grew up driven to fix broken souls, but the psychiatrist's tools were such blunt things back then. Scalpels to open flesh, words and drugs to open minds. Our techniques had all the precision of a drunkard stomping on the floor, trying to move glasses on the bar with the vibrations of his boot. These machines your mother has, though, transcranial superconductors, deep focus microwave emitters, spindle resonators, specific pathways targeted, rewritten, erased completely. Their very names sound like incantations. I cannot use them as she can. I only know the basics. I can't implant sights or sounds, can't create actual memories. Not declarative ones, anyway. But procedural memory? That I can do. The right frontal lobe, the hippocampus, basic fear and anxiety responses. The reptile is easily awakened. And you didn't need the details. No need to remember my baby sister face down like a pile of sticks in the mud. No need for the color of the sky that day, as I stood frozen and fearful of some real monster's notice should I go to her. You didn't need the actual lesson. The moral would do. Afterwards you sat up, confused, then disappointed, then resentful. That was nothing. It didn't even work. I needed no machines to see into your head then. Senile old fart doesn't know half as much as he thinks. And as one day went by, and another, I began to fear you were right. But then came the retching sounds from behind the bathroom door. All those hours hidden away in your room, your game pod abandoned on the living room floor. And then your mother came to me, eyes brimming with worry. Never seen you like this, she said, jumping at shadows, not sleeping at night. This morning she found you throwing clothes into your backpack. They're coming, we gotta run. And when she asked who they were, you couldn't tell her. So, here we are. You huddle in the corner, your eyes black, begging holes that can't stop moving, that see horrors in every shadow. Your fists bleed, nails gouging the palms. I remember when I was your age. I cut myself to feel alive. Sometimes I still do. It never really stops. Someday, your mother says, her machines will exorcise my demons. Doesn't she understand what a terrible, terrible mistake that would be? Doesn't history, once forgotten, repeat? Didn't even the worst president in history admit that memories belong to everyone? I say nothing to you. We know each other now, so much deeper than words. I have made you wise, grandson. I have shown you the world. Now I will help you to live with it.
And that was Repeating the Past by Peter Watts. Anyway, that's where I'll leave you all on that uplifting note that you can truly, it is possible, I swear, teach Oh, there it goes. Weird. Mic cut out. Sorry about that. Boy, I hope it wasn't cut out for the last 10 minutes. Anyway, Yeah, that's where I'll leave it. Hopefully people enjoy it. Just Peter Watts doing short story things. Some are more edgy than others. This Friday we should be able to finish this. What short stories are there? One of them is basically a scene that's like replicated in what's it called? In Starfish. And it's the long one, because of course it is. Actually, that's like the only story there, but there is an outro to the book, which I'll read, because sometimes he's fascinating in those. Let's see, when actually was Ambassador published? That's a good question. In 2002, which I think means it predates Dark Forest. There's another, what was it? There's another book that basically has the same conclusion. I want to say it's by Gregg Bear. And that's from like the 80s. So people have played with the idea that the Dark Forest works with for a while. I should read when some of these came from. It's true. That would be a good idea. Hopefully the page flipping noises aren't too loud. I don't think they are. Let's see. I can read that later. I don't have to do that now. Anyway, yeah. I want to say we did do a niche in for my Starfish stuff, but I don't mind rereading it again with the new microphone. Anyway, yeah, we'll finish this up Friday, since it looks like I will be here for that. But I will be gone afterwards until... Jeez. It's like the 3rd week of August. I don't know if I'll be back the 3rd week of August or the one after. I'm not sure. We'll find out. I'll be able to get a post in the in the Discord to update people, but I'll make a post there saying that I'm not going to be there for the next 3 weeks. But yeah. Thank you, Plunderlings, for tuning in. That's awesome too. I appreciate it. Yeah, Peter Watts is... I like his books. I really like his short form content. A lot of his body of work is short form, shorter stories. Let me see if he's... I don't think he's got a more recent publication of them, unfortunately. Let me check here real quick. Where are you? Oh, that's right. He does have a more recent one, but it's in Polish. Because of course it is. For whatever reason it may be, Eastern Europeans really dig his work. A lot. I totally get it. I totally get it. And of course Amazon doesn't have it listed because it's Amazon. That would make too much sense. Where are you? I thought there was another one. Anyway, you can get a whole... like, almost everything, I think, in this book is on his website. Right here, which I can post in here, so you can read it on your own time. There's a bunch of more recent ones as well. Not all of his most recent ones, I don't think. Yeah, I know there's one between Collateral and Incorruptible, I thought. Incorruptible's the one I'm thinking of, right? Incorruptible's pretty good. Depending on how quickly we're done next week, I might do that one. Because Incorruptible is cute. I like it. It's charming. It's not funny. It's not funny, but it is cute. It's fairly similar to some of the other, like this story that we just read, and some of the others that involve a certain degree of editing, if you will, tweaks. Oh yeah, this is the one I was thinking of. Bizarrely, you have to get it using Wayback Machine, which is annoying, because for whatever reason, the people who published it expunged it at some point. Oh no. Can't get to that one either. There was this absolutely gorgeous printed edition, like coffee table edition of the things that got pushed out recently, but it was way too expensive for my blood. I would love to have owned it, but I'm sorry. Like, I'm not a tremendous cheapskate, but like, it's... Oh, but he has the PDF for it. What an absolute champ this man is. Oh, also there's already a recording of the things on YouTube, so... Yeah. He's got the PDF for it, so at least you can do that, because it was, I don't know, it was like $200, $300. It was pricey, but it was, like, pretty nearly worth it. It's also very long, because it's a picture book, where it's got kind of a weird kaleidoscopic thing of Antarctica going on, with, like, a couple lines between pictures. It's very cute. Very trippy. Anyway, with that I'm going to go. Hopefully the microphone change is working out. Hopefully the audio level isn't too high and isn't too low. My concern is picking up too much ambient background radiation, as it were, because I don't have a readily available soundproofed setup. I could feasibly make one out of a closet. I could feasibly do it. But then I'm trapped in a closet with a microphone, which honestly would make for a great album title. But yeah, I could retrofit a closet into a soundproofed room, but at this stage I don't really want to do that. Mostly because of the discomfort it would involve for me, not for everyone seeing that I'm living in a closet. Don't need that. Yep, that's about it. I can't really think of anything else off the top of my noggin. As ever, you can check out the rest, all of the Rifters series you can get for free on his website on that link I included, as well as Blind Sight, but not Echopraxia or the Freeze Frame Revolution. Someday, maybe. Someday. Of interest. Out of interest. That's a Kindle edition of that. Oh, that's right. He did a combined like omnibus edition of Blind Sight and Echopraxia. And because that keeps getting published in various forms, that's probably why it's still not available. Also, a man's gotta eat, right? I get it. I think it's tremendously cool that he releases them at all for free. Nope. just do a quick double check on Gregg Egan real quick. GreggEgan.net. Anything new from my boy? Nope. I am up to date on his work. There's actually a bunch of short stories I don't have that are older published ones that I don't think have been reprinted that I've got to get a hold of. I have to figure out which ones they are. I'll do that someday. I don't consider myself a great collector per se, but for authors that I care about. For authors that I care about. Yep, that's it. My brain can't think of anything else. I gotta do a bunch of other things right now, so I'm going to leave you all with that. Stay safe, stay sane, stay cool. Oh my God, stay cool. Unless you're in Australia right now, and even then, probably. And be decent to each other, best you can. We got some people taking certain actions into their own hands against certain corporate entities of varying stripes. I am not going to say certain things about that. For fear of being deplatformed. I already read Radicalized on here, so I think we can continue to be subversive. That reminds me, I've got to get an order in for enshittification by Cory Doctorow. I got to do that at some point. Anyway, I'll see you all later. Stay safe, stay sane, be decent to each other. I did that already. What am I doing? I don't know. I'm looking for the button.